version with no cut-in class and no card draw until you get to Wantley. And I feel that when you get to buff the Orgrimancer with conditioning, it really is a big struggle for Mage, and also Token Druid if you can survive to that point.
All right, well, game number 2, looks like we're hopping in here, is about to begin. As we're taking a look at the opening mulligans here. Taesang, only liking the Lunar Eclipse, wants to fight for board, but also wants to really focus on ramping up his resources. Kranich likes most of his hand here. Blade Master Samuro, one of the most important cards against Token Druid. We'll see if this is going to be the makings of his giant swing turn, which feels like it's going to be the case, right? Whose swing turn is stronger? Is it the Druid setting up the board? Is it the Rush Warrior crushing the dreams of Druid like we saw in the previous series?
Right. I think the general way this matchup goes is the Druid makes one big push either with Gibberlings or with the Glowfly Swarm, and then it's either the Rush Warrior kind of scrambles to deal with 3 or 4 minions with whatever board they already had plus stuff from hand, or they get the Samuro for the big sweep. And if they can take a hold of the board after that, it's very hard for Druid to come back. But there are hands where if you invest too much in developing just the Samuro, the Warrior can actually run out of value.
Yes, that is true. We have seen Warrior gassed out at times. Not super common, but it is entirely possible to happen. Oh, geez. Okay. I mean, there's some real power working in Taesang's hand in terms of consecutive turns of building up board pressure with the back-to-back Arbor ups.
Right. I mean, if he does go for one Arbor up as soon as next turn, though, there will be kind of a void on turn 4 on what he wants to do. If this board had stuck around, I would say it's probably still worth it, but you can see immediate respect from Kranich here using a broomstick for what looks like not that much value, but I really like the idea of getting a minion on board, because if Taesang has stuck nothing, the playmaker requires Lunar Eclipse to be dealt with.
Yeah, and I like, you know, we didn't really touch too much on it, but I like the animated broomstick in a Rush Warrior where you're playing less Rush minions than usual. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really make as much sense if you take out the Wand Makers and the Ogremancers and are playing Rush minions, but in that case, a very nice use case of it, just to handle token-based aggression like this coming out of Taesang. And as a result, neither player really getting an advantage early on. And unless Taesang finds more resources, that puts him in the disadvantage. You find Glowfly Swarm a little bit too expensive. We'll see if the Guidance can help provide additional resources here.
Yeah, the Lightning Bloom can be used to pair with the Arbor Up right now. Taesang, I think having used Arbor Up the previous turn was giving up on trying to build up for a Glowfly Swarm. Of course, that card didn't enter his hand until this turn. So I was interested in just going for another big push this turn. However, Taesang may be trying to parse out his resources a little bit over a longer course of time. I feel like that window may be closing, though. It really depends on whether he can pick up Fungal Fortunes in the near future.
Near future, ideally next turn. After at least what Kranich is able to do here. This Treant's definitely annoying to deal with. Does not have the best answer right now. So a lot of times in this case, you feel like Ringmaster Watley is going to be crucial for your success in the mid-game moving forward.
Mm-hmm. It's Kranich's only play, really, but the fact that Taesang was able to stick a 7-5 despite Kranich having a weapon is so huge, because now Arbor Up looks absolutely insane. He can chip, I guess, all of it to the face. Then you had a decent read on Kranich not having a good answer for the 7-5 last turn. He knows about Bumper Car in hand right now, so what Taesang has to be worried about is specifically a Playmaker to go along with that, but he has already seen one from Kranich.
That's right. So what is Taesang's best response to that? Does he want to go even wider? It's not even that much of a wider board because Glowfly Swarm and the Thorn does the same exact thing. So, well, not exact. You get a little bit more power in exchange of Taunt. And I think, you know, Taesang, from his perspective, might just do exactly what he said, which is just leverage his existing board here.
Right. it gives up on his long-term prospects if Kranich is able to clear the board, but I think based on the Watley play last turn, Taesang should have a good idea that Kranich's clear resources are limited, and this board only needs to attack twice to get lethal. Oi.
Yeah, Orgrimmar isn't it for this turn. No buff for Samuro to make that decisive swing, and it looks like Druid might have just a tad too much. Does have ways to get stuff in the way, though. Sword Eater is at least a taunt.
That is true. Kranich can face tank this 9, put a taunt in the way, and then if he wants Crab Rider to get rid of the Marcel, it's really ugly, but it might just be the only way he can stay in the game. If he can pick up a clutch conditioning next turn, Samuro can sweep up. That is, if Kranich stays alive, though.
Yeah, it's close. It does not seem like Taesang has the answer here, at least the lethal. Glimmer of hope?
Small glimmer, but the thing is, Taesang can push at least 4 this turn and then just redevelop onto the board with that Solar Eclipse and the Thorngrowth sentries. And fit in the hero power still. So actually, if Kranich does top deck conditioning, then he is back in the series, because by that point, Druid is only dealing 1 damage with their hero power every turn, and Kranich simply needs to find time to armor up every turn, and he can eventually get to Alex.
Very true. That is the only card that we can think of, though, and it's not it. So Kranich, swing and a miss. And that should do it for game number 2, because it doesn't seem like there's any play available to him to keep him alive. Just too much pressure. Unless I'm missing something here.
Nope, I don't see it either. Not being able to buff Samuro from either stage dive or conditioning makes it a very, very weak card in the matchup. 1 damage AoE, not enough to get there against anything but unbuffed Gibberlings.
It can sweep up a Marcel Cup. That's about it. Kranich concedes. Taesang, fellow Korean player, gonna take game number 2, which sets up just his mage remaining. But this is the deck that Kranich wants to play. He says, bring it on. This is what I'm trying to target. Are these the 3 decks to beat it, in your opinion, Gia?
I think they are definitely decently positioned against Mage. If you wanted to hedge for the most percent, maybe Weapon Rogue would be slotted in here instead of either the Druid or the Warrior, but then that is a deck that kind of loses to a significant other portion of the field, so I get what Kranich is going for. I think just the fact that he's bringing Hunter should tell you that he is trying to go all in on this matchup. It's a very brave strategy, but Kranich was prepared to possibly go 0-2 before he tries and bullies this deck. And the build from Taesang is not the most anti-aggro we've ever seen. The deck of Lunacy in there, kind of slow. Double Combustion helps, but he doesn't have things like Ice Barrier or Another Wind Portal to give him a bit more long-term lasting power.
All right, well, the Spell Mage here, pretty straightforward. Nothing too out of the ordinary or from Taesang's perspective. Mage has a positive win rate against Warrior this tournament so far, but those tech cards is what we're curious about. Kranich clearly built his lineup with this in mind, and so we'll see if that's enough. This is round 3 bonus coverage, by the way. Round 3 Swiss is finishing up, so you can follow along with us if you type exclamation mark link or bracket into chat. You can follow along with us over on Battlefy. You can also take a look at their deck list, which is really cool. Speaking of deck lists, here's Kranich's Face Hunter with a couple of interesting picks here, but most importantly, the most important thing to focus on for Kranich is whether or not he can get that damage to the face and try to pressure his opponent as soon as possible.
And this build of Face Hunter, let alone it being in a lineup, is very unusual, but this build also is different from the one I am used to. It includes True Aim Crescent and Ace Hunter Kreen instead of some of the other early game options in there. The Barracuda Vein, non-negotiable. I feel it's too strong with Mankrik. Might be a win condition in itself for the deck, but the fact that he is including trading tools such as the True Aim Crescent and the Ace Hunter Queen, I feel is techs for matchups other than Mage, which tells me that Kranich thinks that the core of the deck is strong enough that he doesn't need to go all out with every single piece of burst he can to beat the matchup.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Those are trading tools, which is not what the meme tells us to do. But Kranich is trying to ensure that he doesn't completely get blown out if, you know, say he goes up against paladins or rogues or any other classes that he might need to fight for that early board. And here we go. Game number 3 is upon us. Full mulligan for Kranich. Taesang with a pretty okay hand, but obviously with like better cards like Incanter's Flow to help get things started a little bit quicker. So from his perspective, we have a mulligan expert actually with us on broadcast. It's Gia. She does a great segment for Grandmasters called Mull It Over. What do you think about Taesang's hand? What would you keep versus not?
My first instinct would be a full mull here, and as he does go for it, feels bad for me to say that as soon as he's already started, but I think the only thing he was possibly considering was the Brain Freeze, which certainly helps clear this type of early presence from Kranich, the Intrepid Initiate / Kolkar Pack Runner. But I feel that just clearing every turn still leaves the Mage at a deficit because Hunter will be pushing out incremental damage in the meantime, and if you spent the entire early game just answering their threats one for one and not racing them, then the Hunter can very comfortably get over the finish line with Piercing Shot and things of that nature. So I like that Taesang was looking for the flow a bit harder, and he got it.
Absolutely, and I think that we've seen that happen a lot, even in our Grandmasters matches, where players sometimes took a conservative line and just got burned out by the Hunter, and then alternatively, some mages took some bolder lines, found a way to try and pressure the Hunter right back because the Hunter does have that inevitability with a bunch of damage and narrowly get the wins. And I think those are the moments where the Mage are able to swing even the series outcomes because they're able to get that Mage through past the Hunter. And remember, Taesang knows he has 3 chances with Mage, so why not be bold and try to go for gold here. That being said, it's not a great start for him. He did play the Incanter's Flow and did not find anything to follow up. Can this Font of Power be enough?
The Observer in a different world where it would be active immediately would be great, but the Dormant feels like it's just far too late. The Felmaw is coming online next turn. Kranich has had a perfect curve up till now and even goes farther with the Warsong Wrangler into possibly Rhino or just buffing the Volpertingers, I think is also a very valid option.
Yeah, I think the Imprisoned Felmaw is all I'm thinking about, but for the reasons you mentioned, makes me still afraid on Taesang's behalf. Hunter, by the way, has played against 13 games versus Mage so far in this tournament and has a 38% win rate. It's 5 out of 13. It's not the biggest sample size, but Gio's reaction summarizes my eyebrow reaction to when I saw the statistic. Hunter's supposed to be very good against Mage, and yet it's one of its poorer matchup spreads. It has a higher win rate versus Priest than it does Mage in the tournament so far.
That is so strange. That is the opposite of what I would expect there. Taesang's Luminary doing what it was meant to do, just pick up the trade from the Fel, but that is not going to stop Kranich. I love the pick of Volpertinger here. Even though the Rhino fits the curve next turn, there's no guarantee that it'll have a target to rush into. All Kranich is interested in is immediate damage. Look at his hand. It's quick shot, piercing shot, and then the hero powers just get there over time. Even if Taesang had some miracle way to clear the entire board and get an ice barrier online here, Kranich still has a very solid win condition.
Kranich is almost there. 5 damage on board, 6 to the weapon, piercing shot. It's an additional 5. You aim at your own minions. Oh, but you have to kill the Tiny Fin to do that. The choices that we have to make in our lives, Gia.
It's so cruel getting rid of his cute Murloc, but it's all in the name of beating mages. You know what? I can get behind that.
All right. I find that mildly acceptable. Taesang trying to look for anything that can give him some kind of chance. I really don't think that's the case. You know, especially with ring toss is not even active.
Right.
In terms of its corruption, it just seems very minimal chance that Taesang has a chance to survive. And this is exactly how we expected the matchup to go. So I'm not exactly sure why the matchup spread in terms of the data and results have been as lopsided as they have been, but Kranich is going to aim to get a dub on the board and make sure to tilt that percentage in the favor of Hunter soon enough. And he's done a great job of it. A Pegasus Blast for a last-ditch effort. I don't really know if there's anything that can save him, and I think that's going to do it. Taesang is going to concede, and Kranich is on the board.
And that is absolutely the easiest matchup of Kranich's decks against Taesang. Again, he has built his lineup such that everything should be at least slightly favored against Mage, but I feel Hunter has the most percentage. I feel it has like the opposite of 38. It's probably a 62% favorite or better in the matchup. And you can see why Mage doesn't have very many early board tools to get past this type of curve. Even if Taesang had hit the combustion or kept the brain freeze, it was not very good against the Felma, which I feel is the X-Factor minion in this matchup, and against OTK Demon Hunter and against Warlock. 4 health, and the timing of it coming online when other minions are already leading the charge makes it so awkward for all these control classes to deal with.
Very much so. I mean, if you look at the matchup spread on the data sites, it is the worst matchup for Mage. So this was a very easy game 3. Now, game 4 and 5, you know, we've talked about it, we've alluded to it, going to be a little bit trickier here for Kranich. I want to see those tech cards come into play. You know, if there's anything that is as exciting for me, it's probably like a 1B to the 1A. 1A being really clean, crisp, technical play that's flawless, well thought out, and well rewarded, right, on the other side. The second would be really cool deck building inclusions from a player that is anticipating a strategy being too common and punishing that. From the Druid side, though, when you look at this very clean 2-of, there's not even any card on the right side column. What are your thoughts on this particular build of Token Druid?
I think this is just the build, to the point where Blitzchung, Apex, Week 3 Specialist Champion, had a secondary and a tertiary that he just never used on stream, and I'm pretty sure he didn't use it when he was off stream as well, because this is just streamlined to be as consistent as possible. Time and again, the biggest weakness of Token Druid is its own draws, so I believe just based on principle that having 2-ofs of every card is maximizing your chance to get your average game plan online the most likely as possible. And for Kranich, you did mention cool tech cards, but I absolutely think that is reserved for the Warrior only.
Yeah, the Warrior is the one that has the specific tool to try and tilt the matchup in its favor versus Mage. Kranich has to earn the right to be able to play against that. And we'll see if Cenarius and the power of nature can get it done.
Yeah, being on the play for Token Druid, I feel, is not great, because having the coin is just another tool that both buffs Glowfly and sometimes lets you get it down earlier if you want to do that. Card draw, of course, majorly important. I expect Guess the Weight to be kept, although I've seen some Token Druid players just mull for the absolute high roll of trying to get Fungal Fortunes or nothing. I do think, though, that some measure of card draw should be acceptable, though.
Yeah, and you know, Mage does give you a little bit of time to set up. This was a kind of dynamic that we saw being attempted in previous series, but the Druid just didn't actually get enough going on.
In general, Mage will struggle to deal with Glowfly-shaped boards. In my experience, they need to have either double combustion and have it be cheapened by encounters, or early Flame Strike also needing to be cheapened by encounters. But that's to say that the Druid has hit the Glowfly to begin with.
True. Kranich will try to get closer to that with Guess the Weight. Oh, You hate to see it.
That's very unlucky. The deck is streamlined such that beyond the 2-drop spot, you have an even amount of 1 and 0 cost cards as 3 and upward costing cards. So Kranich, of course, can very likely take the right outcome, but didn't quite get it there. The upside for him, though, is that Taesang just pinged on turn 2. You breathe a huge sigh of relief when you see that from the mage.
Very much so. However, Kranich does have his next couple of turns. It has potential to be very powerful here.
Right.
And Taesang does not really have much going on. Does find the Font of Power.
It's really rough, right? Because around turn 4, you can expect them to hit their first wave of Glowflies because they'll generally have 1 ramp card at least by that point. So for Taesang, I feel like the safer thing to do is draw towards Combustion or something like that. But without Flow, the Combustion also just feels a little bit too slow.
Yeah, you know, and I'm thinking about the ways that we saw swings in the previous matchup with Viper, for example, playing Font of Power, getting access to insanely strong swing cards like Raz, Frost Whisperer, maybe some spell damage minions to help improve the quality of Combustion. But that's because I think Viper had those cards like Combustion in hand ready to go. Oh, jeez.
And he can go for 6 Glowflies this turn and then immediately double Bloom with the Pride's Fury. That's like a gazillion stats.
Yes, that is a very accurate number to describe the amount of stats coming out here. Kranich even squeezing in the Adorable Infestation because that extra Innervate that he just drew as well, giving him access to 10 mana crystals, up to 10 mana crystals this turn.
Well, he's holding his horses here. It's because he's seen 0 flows that he doesn't need to immediately buff the board. Again, it's a little bit worse against Combustion, but not terrible because even if some minions get combusted here, Kranich can respond with Arbor Up and then Lightning Bloom all into Pride's Fury all the next turn and push the damage immediately. So what he's doing here is leaving himself the most options, trying not to get blown out by Devolving Missiles immediately. And he has the leeway to not go all in yet because there's no Incanter's Flow.
Excellently summarized. Yeah, and I think that ends up being pretty bad here for Taesang, not hitting, actually not even really reducing the amount of stats on the board.
Yeah.
And so has to make some room for the Refreshing Spring Water, looking for something to get him out of this situation because, I mean, Kranich has a ton of power coming up next. Combustion is in the hand.
I mean, kind of a welcome sight for Taesang, but at the same time, not really, because he's not hit any flows. In the meantime, his Flame Strike is still far away. Scryer just gonna go in and overdraw him because he needed to like make the order in that way with the trade, I think, in order to just remove max power on the board. Yeah, this is really strong. If he just goes Arbor Up, Pride's Fury, you kind of delete any value from the Gibberling later on, but I'm not sure that's even necessary at this point. Alternatively, just Gibberling with the Arbor Up is also very powerful.
Yeah, I feel like I'm more open to this because of what you mentioned before. No Incanter's Flow means that there's no possibility of that Flame Strike still coming for 2 more turns. So I think in his mind, he feels like he can still take his time just a little bit and price for him the follow-up. I mean, this is still a very strong board that's threatening 2-turn lethal regardless of what he did. So I think that, you know, Kranich in his mind is still keeping his options slightly open here.
Yeah. It's interesting because Pride's Fury with the attacks there, I believe still set up 2-turn lethal if you expect most of the board to stick, because then you have the Arbor Up. So what I think Kranich is hedging for here is, again, another partial clear, something like Combustion, where you would rather have the attack committed immediately. So the second wave of attack gets there, even if not the entire board sticks.
Well, either way, Taesang does not have that answer. Hovering over the Apex's Blast, and we know what this usually means when the mage does this. It is desperation time, and that's not going to do anything. Taesang's going to concede. Game number 4 over to Kranich. We have a tied series, and we're going to go to 5 in order to find out who is going to take this series in the crucial round 3. Kranich's reverse sweep against the Mage, I mean, it's working out so far. We might see him do it again, and I'm excited to see this Warrior versus Mage coming up here, Gia.
I'm excited too, because of the 3 matchups, I feel this one is the most iffy, because the turns for Warrior really gets online tends to be when Mage have their strong answers already. You expect them to have at least one flow already, and the Warrior can't dump all of their board out at once the same way Druid can. And so Mage has a bit more of a gradual window where they can answer 1 for 1. However, like you mentioned at the beginning of the series, Kranich has that very interesting tech of the double Orgrimmancers in there, which can maybe mess with Taesang's response options.
Yeah, Kranich, I mean, you talked about how Taesang has all these different tools and Mage can do all these crazy things. But, you know, Kranich did a great job in this game as we're looking at some of the highlights of layering his threats, showing that, you know, while Druid does have these crazy powerful turns with a bunch of mana and that it might look like a straightforward thing, there's still a lot of things to consider, even if it's a matchup that you feel pretty comfortable in. And we'll see if he can carry over that momentum. Taesang's 2-0 lead has completely evaporated. We're now down to a best of 1 to see who can, of these 2 players, remain undefeated going into round 4. Opening mulligans are in. And we'll see if Kranich can continue it. Has the Orgrimmancer in hand to start things off?
That is already such an interesting question, because obviously this card is in there for this specific matchup. But I don't feel like it's good enough to keep on the play. Kranich disagrees, though. Obviously, he has tested with this specific list way more than any of us could. I have never even thought of putting Orgrimmancer in Rush Warrior. Generally, as Rush Warrior, I feel that trying to hit whatever card draw / generation you can in the early game is so important, because the deck can run out of gas pretty often. So Athletic Study, Stage Dive, that type of thing. Kranich says, my average draw is going to be good enough to get me an early curve. And the early curve is what gives him the leeway to play Orgrimmancer safely on the board and then make it more difficult for Taesang. And he did get a 1-2 curve.
It's true. And those little 1 and 2 mana minions do add up against the Mage. We've seen how the chip damage does end up becoming quite relevant. Even being able to activate the Corrupt on the Stage Dive, potentially hitting Crab Rider. Things are lining up nicely. Taesang does have a thing or two to say about it, as the mini Mage does come down here early. Let's see if Kranich can pick up a very impactful turn 3 play. Oh boy.
Stage Dive for it. Even if he doesn't hit like a playable minion immediately, just another bumper card to fill out the curve, I feel is perfectly fine here. Even if this gets devolved, I don't think Kranich is overly sad about it. Yes, you want to have the value from Runthak, but the hand to me looks like it's just trying to cash in with Orgrimmancer. And meanwhile for Taesang, there is an option for devolving missiles, which I think he should absolutely take. He can deny Kranich resources wherever he can. The problem is he still hasn't hit the flow, which means that when the Orgrimmancer comes down, it'll be a nightmare to deal with.
Very much so. And that's kind of the power of Kranich's early start, right? We talked about how these small little minions will force Taesang to respond to it and make Orgrimmancer even better. If you gave Taesang the time to be able to accumulate all these spells and resources, can just bite the bullet and remove Orgrimmancer. We've seen it a lot throughout Grandmasters, actually, where Orgrimmancers felt like they should have been way better, but because the setup to the Orgrimmancer wasn't that good, they had like a spell damage minion, they just fireballed it, and then there was a 2-2 left, and then the Orgrimmancer threat was completely neutralized.
Yeah, or even if it's just a single minion on board, they can devolve, and you know, most of the time, one of the missiles at least hits the Orgrimmancer, and then Mage doesn't really have to care by that point. Kranich, with the early curve, has baited out the devolving missiles, and he has a very clear board. And I think decent tempo Samuro. It's not like Samuro's going to get very much value off Frenzy against Spellmage to begin with, so I like just having the body on board. Most threat, again, try to bait out whatever removal he can from Taesang, and just clear the runway for the Orgrimmancer. Okay, Kranich prioritizing value with the Wandmaker instead, though.
Yeah, that is curious to me. You know, I was kind of thinking about how if Taesang had another form of removal, the Samuro would absolutely draw the removal from Kranich to do that. But Kranich clearly has a different play. What do you think he's considering here?
For Taesang or Kranich? Sorry.
So from Kranich's perspective of setting up the Wandmaker.
I'm honestly not sure. I like the look of just getting the damage on board, because even though Orgrimmancer does shut off most of Mage's plays, it's not like it's immediately threatening lethal. It's just a small amount of damage per turn. So the idea of getting Samuro online to start beating down and threatening Taesang from both the Orgrimmancer front and just damage on board front seemed like a good idea to me. But thankfully for him, the Wandmaker has picked up Stage Dive, and that is going to possibly getting a minion with even more attack than the Samuro. For Taesang, a couple turns ago, we didn't actually mention that he took a trade with the Mini-Mage onto the 2-1, which I actually found kind of unnecessary. I feel the spell damage has a lot of utility with things like Cram Session or even Combustion later on. And the 2 damage per turn is not overly threatening if you think they don't have exactly Rakara.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, the Taesang, you know, not having that spell damage ends up being very relevant in this position. So, yes, by all means, he would love to have gone back and perhaps have access to it to ensure that he doesn't take extra damage unnecessarily. We can see how awkward it is for him to deal with right now. Kara gives the ability. Oh, so now if you play the Rakara and you attack with the Orgrimmancer, it'll be outside the range of hero power.
That's insane. I mean, Taesang with the Fireball last turn, clearly just setting up for the very slow and painful way of dealing with the Orgrimmancer over 2 turns, but now Kranich has checked even that. The one thing he would have to be afraid of, potentially, is Coin Flame Strike, but the fact that he fit in the conditioning on top of Rakara being the buff minion from the Stage Dive means that she's out of range of Coin Flame Strike.
Devolving Missiles, do your best.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, whoa.
I want the best targets, but that kind of gave Kranich still good presence on board. And the draw from the Star Scryer can't be underestimated. The one thing Kranich kind of lacks is resources in hand.
Yes. Although,
it hit the best possible
Mage,
but it gave Kranich like among the best possible outcomes.
Yeah, totally. Just the fact that the power still remains pretty high, right? You know, there's a lot of hype for 2 Pillager to come back into Standard. Turns out 2 Pillager isn't really needed based off of what Rogue has in their available arsenal. Still a menacing threat just by the amount of power on the board. 10, 11, 14, 17 damage is what I count right now. Actually just
one off lethal? Yeah, I'm also counting 17. Kranich needs just 1 damage, no target for Krusty to rush into, and actually no rush minions on board for ETC to proc. So funny.
Very weird, but I mean, Kranich will take it, put Mage down to 1, and the moment a minion is played, the moment Taesang he has to clear the board. I mean, Kranich has this set up. This is so difficult.
I'm just going to go ahead and say it's impossible for Taesang to win, because even if he could somehow magically clear the board and put up an ice barrier, Kranich will never attack face from this point onward. He will simply wait for Taesang to play a minion, and then, as you said, Samuro plus ETC would close it out from that point.
Right, or even just having a minion stay on the board and you know, at that point, like, Taesang has to address the fact that his Ice Barrier might just crack immediately. Taking a look at what's behind Font of Power, still nothing. I mean, a cool legendary, a Firebrand. It's really not working here for Taesang. And Kranich's target mage strategy, there were some question marks over our heads. We weren't sure exactly if it's something that would pay off heavily, but, you know, that's the risk that Kranich took. Good play, good decks, good tech cards. That spells a Game 5 victory into works here for Kranich.
Right.
And that's going to be it. Taesang plays his Combustion. It's a full clear, but that's a minion on board.
Absolutely. It is a full clear, but it necessitated the activation of ETC, and Kranich is going to close it out in the most stylish possible way. He gets the reverse sweep on Mage. That's what the lineup is built to do. It's nice to see it in action. Kranich 3-0 now with the very unusual Hunter Bring.
Very true, and was able to, you know, start making a case for how there are multiple viable lineups. I think a lot of people were focused a lot on the good decks, but what about punishing said good decks, especially if there's a lot of expectation on the performance of Mage? Granted, a couple of really key things happened. You saw, for example, the Rakara that was generated, or rather that was you know, given to Kranich at that time, and being able to keep the Orgrimmancer alive, keeping the pressure going, not giving Mage any breathing room. If you're wondering again, how do I beat a deck like Mage? If you're losing to it consistently, you're probably not going quick enough. Just look at the amount of pressure going out this way. Mage has the answers if you give it the mana crystals and the turns. Taesang knew that even though he cleared the board, he was very likely dead, and Kranich's target Mage strategy has succeeded. That does bring us